Green light is on. Okay, excellent. Well, it's good to have everybody here on this cold morning, and the weather guys say that it might even get colder this time next Sunday. So enjoy it while you can. Count your blessings. We are continuing our study of the Book of First Samuel, and so if you haven't opened your Bible yet, please do so to chapter 16. Um, Thinking about this lesson, I'm reminded about a few years ago, there were something that was all the rage called motivational posters, where it had these beautiful photographs of a sunset or, the Grand Canyon or an ocean sunrising coming up over the ocean or, just beautiful mood setting shots with some very pithy explanation or saying and you would hang it in your office and it would basically help get you through the day. There were even some, church type or scriptural type of motivational posters that, based on Psalm 118, this is the day the Lord has made, rejoice and be glad. Inevitably, that someone came along and said, if you can have motivational posters, why not have demotivational posters? Let's do a little pushback here. And I remember one of them was a picture of a huge, like a oil tanker or cargo ship sinking in the ocean. And the motto underneath the picture said, it just might possibly be that the whole purpose of your life is to serve as a warning to others. And I I think of that as we look at poor old Saul. We've been calling on Saul for the past two or three lessons, and gee, he started out so well. When he was anointed king, the Spirit of God came on him, and he was actually doing some good things. He got off to a great start, but somewhere along the way, things began to, the wheels started coming off the train, and uh, the level of his performance as king began to suffer, and probably because, and very most likely because, he kept God at arm's length. He had that introduction to God. He had God's Spirit. He had God's invitation to, hey, look, I'm here. Use me. I am so ready and so eager to guide you along the way as Israel's king. And that was an ongoing invitation. And apparently, we've seen some episodes where Saul apparently just pushed back. You know, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. The running the country is my thing. Dealing with God, that's Samuel's thing, and never the twain shall meet. In fact, it was kind of that mindset. We saw one episode where Saul winds up doing something he shouldn't have done. That was to basically do some priestly duties in offering sacrifices. And, Samuel, where were you? You're supposed to come here at the appointed day. You were nowhere around. And people were running away, and things were just disintegrating and growing worse by the minute. I had to do something. I had to do your job. And basically, what he did was transgress the will of God. And he actually got a heads up at that time. He said, Samuel tells him, Saul, I'm sorry, but the message from God is that your kingdom will not endure with what you've done and what you're doing. He is already looking for a man after his own heart. That was kind of like a heads up to him. A wise, perceptive leader would have said, you know what, I have really messed up here. I really need to get right with God. And maybe things would have turned out a little bit better for Saul than the way they're going to turn out. This is kind of a spoiler alert. If you haven't read 1 Samuel at all, things are going to start to go downhill for Saul. In fact, they already have. There was another episode where we studied last week where God gave him basically kind of like, hey, you had one job. Go in there and wipe out the Amalekites. No ifs, ands, or buts, no exceptions. I just want the entire community eliminated based on what they did to my people, the Israelites. Your people too, Saul. And Saul did it, kind of, sort of. Wound up sparing the king, wound up sparing the best of the livestock. Oh, it'd be a shame to just kill all that off and burn it. Ah, gee. Tell you what, we'll save some, and if anyone asks, we're saving it for the sacrifice. Not washing with Samuel, not washing with God. And basically, God sends his second pronouncement, his second judgment, saying, your kingdom will not endure. It's going to be handed over to someone who's serious about following me, which is what I want. And last week, our lesson ended kind of on a sour note. It ended badly. Everybody went to their home corners. Saul went back to his home palace. Samuel went back to his hometown where he held court. And that was the last Samuel ever saw of Saul. And the last verse of chapter 15 ends until the day Samuel died. He did not go to see Saul again, though Samuel mourned for him. And Samuel was not the only person who was mourning. Also, we find that the Lord regretted he had made Saul king over Israel. Saul had an opportunity to be a man after God, and God gave him many, many opportunities to be that kind of king, and Saul consistently rejected it. So last week ends on a down note. That's where we pick up today as we get into chapter 16. Apparently, some time has elapsed. Samuel has continued to mourn for Saul. You have to understand, I think we can appreciate that given the relationship that Samuel started out with Saul, there was a closeness, there was a concern. It was almost like Saul was one of Samuel's sons, the black sheep that finally went astray. So Saul's been mourning. And finally, in chapter 16, verse 1, the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, since I've rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. Horn of oil is significant because God is giving Samuel a specific job to do. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king. Okay, Saul, or okay, Samuel, I understand where you're coming from. I've felt the same way. I feel badly about how this has transpired, but the time for mourning is past. It's the time to act is now. I need you to go do that. Okay, clear instructions, but Samuel gets a little weak-kneed here, which is kind of unusual for Samuel. Remember, this is the guy who basically chopped the king of Agag, the Amalekite, to pieces. And here he's kind of shaking at his knees. Samuel says, verse 2, how can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me. Gee. I think this kind of shows that even strong men of God, strong people who are totally follow the God and seek to do as well, can have those occasional moments of weakness, because everybody's human. And humans have emotions. Fear is one of them. Samuel's experiencing it right now. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 16, for those of you who are following along. Well, God has a response for that. The Lord said, take a heifer with you. Heifer, for those of us who are not agriculturally minded, heifer is a cow. Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate. God says, don't be afraid. I'm sending you to do my work, my business, and I'm sending you with a specific task so that if anyone asks you what you're up to, you can reply honestly. You're not deceiving, you're not telling a lie. So Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Probably news about what happened with King Agag has kind of spread around. If you see Samuel coming, get out. You know, don't cross him. Well, Samuel puts their fears at ease. He said, "Yes, I've come in peace. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. And the way this is worded essentially indicates that Jesse and his sons received something more than, "Hey, we'll reserve a table for you at the back of the room. Jesse, you and your sons, we're going to have a little ceremony here, and you guys are going to play a special part in it. So dress up and be nice and be on time." So, verse 6, when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab. This is the oldest son. Jesse has 8 sons, as we will find out. Eliab is the oldest, and apparently, like Saul, pretty good looking. Maybe he does a little fashion modeling. You never know. But Samuel takes one look at Eliab and says, "I bet this is the guy God's thinking about." He says, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. He's got to be the man." He looks the part, straight out of central casting. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab, this is his second oldest son, and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah. This is the third oldest of the bunch. Basically, they're just parading, oldest to youngest, one at a time, but no response from God. Samuel knows what that means. This is not the one. And that's what he tells Jesse. "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" Hey, 7 sons of Jesse, and not a positive response from God. Something's missing. Someone's missing. "You sure you got all your family here, Jesse?" "Well," Jesse answers, "there's the youngest, but he's out tending the sheep." Wow. Tells you 2 things here. Yeah, we got the youngest. He's kind of like the run of the litter. He kind of gets lost, if we call him a lot of things, but all he cares about not to be called late for dinner, because if he does, he gets there'll be nothing at the table for him. Also, not a wealthy family, because if a family has sheep, they usually hire, if they're wealthy enough, they hire someone to be the shepherd, look after the sheep. They're not that rich. So, the youngest of the bunch has been delegated to be the shepherd. Tells you something. It's a lowly job, and it's delegated to the youngest son, so that kind of tells you about this youngest son's standing in the family. Not very high. Probably that's the way it is with large families, that, the youngest kid kind of gets lost in everything that's going on. Well, not with Samuel. Samuel says, "Send for him. We will not sit down. We will not continue with this ceremony until he arrives." Samuel says, "I'm not interested. Don't send him a note of condolence. Don't wish him well for me. This is not a case of where we'll just make do with what we got. We ain't going any further until your youngest son is here, because there's something about this youngest son that God wants." So Jesse sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health. He was ruddy. with bright eyes and good looking, according to New King James Version. Ruddy meaning a fair complexion. Something. Basically, this was a good looking kid. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one. This is the man." Probably more literally, a boy. According to the ancient historian Josephus, David was perhaps as young as age 10 when this was going on. Perhaps there are other commentators who believe he was an older teenager, somewhere around 15, probably a lot of folks settle on 17. He was, by our standards, not quite an adult, but he could pass for a young man. He was young. He was definitely the kid in the family. But something more important, he was also a man after God's own heart. This is the man God wanted as the next king of Israel. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah, his hometown. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to the palace of the current king, King Saul. And things are going along about what you might expect. Now, the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. Geez, the Lord has evil spirits? Well, maybe that's not what the writer intended, because we just don't see God as the author of anything evil. Probably what this means is because Saul had rejected the Spirit of God so consistently and for so long, when God made the decision, hey, he is no longer going to be king of Israel, basically he says, okay, Saul, you go your way, I'll go mine. And as part of that package, I will withdraw my protection from you, from all the spiritual forces that are out there. This is one of the dangers. I think God is a God who gives you your heart's desire ultimately. He gives you what you want. If you want to be a child of God, He will nurture that. He will bless that. If you persistently say, sorry, God, I don't want any part of you, He won't impose Himself on you. But part of that package is you may also lose whatever spiritual protection you might get. And this is what we see here, I believe. In withdrawing His presence from Saul, that means that there are certain ungodly forces that can come and attack Saul. And apparently there is one such spirit that does this. Comes in, enters Saul's spirit, and torments him. Saul's attendants said to him, "See, a distressing or an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord command his servants here to search for someone who can play the lyre. He will play when the evil spirit from God comes on you, and you will feel better." Hey, Saul, and these are probably folks who have to work around Saul, and it can get a little, contentious sometimes if you never know what mood someone's in. One moment he's, "Hey, how's it going, man? Looks like a great day outside," and then the next moment he's turning into a raging maniac. It's kind of hard to work around those individuals. And in fact, in terms of what do I say? What do I do? Help, Saul's after me. Well, what can we do? Well, maybe we can get some kind of music therapy out there when he starts getting a little hanky like that. Summon the guy with the harp, let him play a few familiar tunes, and that'll calm him down. So Saul said to his attendants, he thinks that's a good idea. Yeah. Find someone who plays well and bring him to me. One of the servants answered, "Hey, I've seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the harp. He's a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well, and he's a fine-looking man, and the Lord is with him." Now, that last sentence may have just kind of tumbled out of his mouth, but that was the most important aspect. God is with him. And in terms of for someone who speaks well, that may be another way of saying he's very prudent in choosing his words. He just doesn't say the first thing that rattles off his brain. He's very diplomatic. He's tactful, especially if he's dealing with a very antsy, raging king who's out of control. So the deal's made. Yeah, let's go look for this David guy. Then Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me your son David, who's with the sheep. Send me that shepherd kid." So Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them with his son David to Saul. Not so much for David's benefit, but basically, hey, you're going to see the king. We better send him a gift. So David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much. Some translations say Saul loved him greatly. So a little bonding there. Hey, that's a good thing. David became one of his armor bearers, which means that in the event of battle, he was going to be one of Saul's chief assistants in fighting the battle. Then Saul sent word to Jesse saying, "Allow David to remain in my service, for I am pleased with him." Whenever the Spirit from God came on Saul, David would take up his harp and play. Then relief would come to Saul. He would feel better. The evil spirit would leave him. Now, apparently this was, David got drafted. David got inducted. But apparently this was not a full-time job, because as we go into the next chapter, we're going to find that David was not necessarily a full-time harp player at the palace. There were times when, hey, David, we really need you. Play your heart out here, because we got to get Saul through this mood that he's in. But when things kind of settled down, David would be allowed to leave and go back and tend the sheep. Kind of an important note, because there is this military challenge that comes up in chapter 17. Now, the Philistines, who we know have been just these almost continuous enemies of the Israelites, just more than pestering them. They've dominated the land. They have beaten them into submission. They're just, they've been really terrible. They're terrible next door neighbors, or what they are. Well, once again, the Philistines start making trouble. They gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soko in Judah. Judah, of course, is in that southern section of the land that God had allocated to Israel. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim between Soko and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. And into this valley stepped a very striking individual. Verse 4, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath. An important note here, because if you do some research on the town of Gath, you find out that they were noted for a race of giant people known as the Anakim. And when you see the description of Goliath here, he's got to be one of them. He comes out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits in a span. That translates to better than 9 feet tall. One estimate is as high as 9 feet, 9 inches. Others say, well, maybe not that tall. Maybe he's just 8.5 feet high. Still, that's the kind of guy that you ask, hey, how's the weather up there? And hope that he doesn't spit on you and say it's been raining. It's a very imposing figure, even from a distance. He had a bronze helmet on his head, wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels, or 125 pounds. Ouch. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his neck. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and his iron point weighed 600 shekels, or another 15 pounds. All told, Goliath was hauling around armor and weaponry weighing anywhere from 150 to 200 pounds. You know, there are days when I'm not sure I can even pick up 10 pounds. So, you're looking at 200 pounds. That's the equivalent of a full grown person or more. And his shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? I am not, or am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he's able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects, and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Saul really didn't have to fight anyone. What he was doing was having the desired effect. He was demoralizing the Israelites. And at the top of the chain, he was demoralizing Saul, because there sat Saul doing nothing, because this thing was going on for like 40 days. Meanwhile, verse 12, David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, so they were out at the camp watching Goliath, appearing twice a day. Matinees on Wednesdays. But David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days, the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Thank goodness they didn't have cable news back in the day. You can just imagine, yeah, here we are back at the Valley of Elah, and yeah, we're just about ready for Goliath's appearance. By day 29, they would be talking to the members of the Israelite or the Philistine forces and asking them for recipes about, making breakfast on the front. Anything just to be different. It's just the same old thing, day after day after day after day. And into this is about to walk David with the help of his father Jesse, who said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men in the valley of the Elah, fighting against the Philistines." Good old Jesse. Maybe he was familiar with the kind of rations you have when you're on foot in the military. He knew something about those meals ready to eat, the MREs. And they probably want something a little bit more substantial than that. So loads up the burro and with all this good stuff. And that's your job, son. You need to go down, check out your brothers, see how they're doing, and then give them all this food so they won't die of starvation. So early in the morning, David left the flock in a care of a shepherd. Kind of shows how conscientious he is. He's going to take care of the sheep. Loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. At least the Israelites, the army guys, are keep basically maintaining a good front. Yeah, we're going to go out and do our shout. Hey, what do we want? Yeah. Little things like that. Actually fighting Goliath, not so much, but hey, we'll holler at him. Verse 21, Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel." In fact, things had gotten so bad in the 40 days that Saul, instead of doing anything about it, instead of leading the Israelites into some kind of a military plan, basically was beginning to bribe the army to do what they otherwise would have been doing, what Saul would have been doing otherwise. And it's up to 3 bribes now. Here are the bribes. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him, a cash reward. Number 2, he will also give his daughter in marriage. Hey, you'll get to be the son-in-law to the king, part of the royal family. And the third, maybe the most valuable thing, he will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. Hooray. No more 49% bracket. I can spend all that money. Verse 26, David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? That's the major problem right there. This is a spiritual problem, and it's got to be dealt with. They repeated to him what they'd been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. And at that point, there's a little bit of a family feud that erupts here, because verse 28, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Gee, Eliab, how do you really feel about David? Not very much, not very well. Well, David feels the heat and he responds, now what have I done? Can't I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. And the men answered him as before, when what David said was overheard, and reported to Saul. Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. No one else is stepping up to it to do the task. I'm willing to do it. Saul replied, you're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man. He's been a warrior from his youth. David, I really like that fighting spirit in you, but hey, number one, you're just a punky kid, or at least a punky looking kid. And hey, Goliath has probably been a fighting soldier longer than you've been alive on earth. You don't stand a chance against this guy. David has an answer for that. Verse 34. He tells Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. I will kill this mocker of God, and I will do it because God will be with me, and God will enable me to do that. Well, when Saul sees where he's coming from, he says to David, go, and the Lord be with you. But let me help here. So Saul dressed David in his own tunic, or probably in another translation, a coat of mail, basically one of the defensive pieces of clothing. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. You can probably almost see this in a movie. This is probably one of the comedy scenes. David fastened on his sword over the tunic, tried walking around, not getting very far with it because he was not used to them. Probably he was just falling down because it was just everything was so clunky and so big, probably much too big for him. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I'm not used to them. So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, hey, Goliath, that's not fair. It's two against one. He kept coming closer to David. He looked David over. Or, one translation figured that because David was so tall, or Goliath was so tall and David so small, he probably looked around to see where David was coming from. Oh, there you are. And he saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome. And he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come with me with sticks?" Now we think dog, oh, he's comparing him to maybe a golden retriever or a chihuahua or whatever. New. Uh Back in the day, dog, translated from the Hebrew kalib, refers to male homosexual prostitutes. Goliath is basically saying, this boy is an insult to my manhood. Man, now I'm really upset. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the bird and the wild animals. David replied, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Hey, Goliath, I've got something better than your weapons. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. Now you can imagine how David said this. If he's a teenager, his voice is probably not as well developed or as deep as that or as loud as Goliath's. From a human perspective, oh gee, David sounds so squeaky voice. This is just not going to work. Well, we'll see how it works here. Verse 48. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag, taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. Yeah, a lot of good the armor and the armor bearer did. That stone went to a totally unprotected place. And I'm sure, not coincidentally, I am sure God directed that stone where it needed to go. The stone sank into his forehead, and poor old Goliath fell face down on the ground, not getting up. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. Military equivalent of adding insult to injury. Not only to be killed with your own weaponry, but also to be decapitated. But considering the people involved, probably served them right. Well, this is not the outcome that the Philistines were expecting. Oh, gee. Where'd that come from? Oh my gosh. The Israelites have won the battle. They're after us. When they saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Shaaraim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. Hey, something that all victorious soldiers get to do. You go back to the enemy camp and take whatever looks good and whatever is left. David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem. Not that day, and probably not for several years, because at that point, Jerusalem had not been captured by the Israelites. This apparently was a little footnote of something that happened when David became king. But there was something that he did do. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent, a weapon that David will use later in our study of 1 Samuel. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, Abner, whose son is that young man? Now, it might be that Saul's state of mind was, he just can't remember anything or anyone, can't place the face. The way the Hebrew is written may suggest that, hey, yeah, I know this guy because, yeah, he's the harp player, but I really don't know him. It's kind of the guy who comes and delivers the mail, and you know who he is, but you really don't know who he is. You don't know his family, you don't know his background. Saul realizes, hey, based on my promises, he's about to become part of the family. Maybe I need to find out a little bit more about him. Who is this young man? Abner replied, as surely as you live, your majesty, I don't know. King said, well, find out whose son this young man is. As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul. Oh, this is a nice picture with David still holding the Philistine's head. Whose son are you, young man? Saul asked him. David said, I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem. And so a marvelous victory, a God-sent, God-delivered victory for the Israelites over the Philistines, and a turning point for the relationship in David and Saul. Things are going to continue with between David and Saul. Looks like, hey, David and Saul, you got a team. This is the kind of stuff they make buddy movies out of. Well, we'll see, because this is setting the table for some very dramatic things that are about to happen in our next few chapters. So for our next lesson, please read chapters 18 and 19. That'll be our next lesson, which will be approximately 3 weeks, or it'll be 3 weeks from today. We're going to take a break from Bible class. So no Bible class next Sunday, Christmas Day, nor the following Sunday, January 1st, New Year's Day, but we'll meet back here on Sunday, January the 8th. So to everybody, I hope you have a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Be safe. And God willing, we'll meet back here in 3 weeks. Thanks.